Imagine a world where your daily bread felt like sawdust and a pinch of pepper cost a fortune. Welcome to the hidden hardships of medieval dining. Peasant staples, the backbone of medieval nutrition. Picture a humble peasant cottage at dawn. The morning light filters through a thatched roof, and a simple pot of gruel, thick barley porridge, bubbles over the hearth. For most medieval families, this same bowl of porridge would form the core of every meal. Grains like barley, rye, and, for those a little better off, wheat, were the foundation of the peasant diet. They were hardy crops, able to grow in poor soils and cool climates, but their nutrition and flavor left much to be desired, and they shaped the very health and rhythm of medieval life. At its simplest, porridge was made by boiling ground or cracked grain in water, and occasionally a splash of meager milk if a family had a cow. It was filling, yes, but also bland, gritty, and prone to scorching if left unattended. Under ideal conditions, say, well-milled barley and a well-tended hearth, the gruel might be smooth. More often, though, uneven grinding left bits of husk and grit that scraped the palate. Too little water, and you'd end up with a thick mush that stuck like clay in the gut. Too much, and the result was a thin, flavorless soup that did little to ward off morning hunger. Bread, the other daily staple, suffered from its own drawbacks. Peasants relied on coarse, dense loaves made from rye or barley mixed with little wheat flour. Archaeologists digging in rural village sites across Europe have uncovered discarded bread molds and fragments of stone millstones showing heavy wear, evidence that milling processes were rudimentary and often contaminated with grit from the grinding stones themselves. These black breads could be so dense that they required soaking in broth or ale just to make them chewable. Over time, peasant teeth often wore down to nubs, reflecting a lifetime of biting through gritty crusts. Real-life accounts from monastic chroniclers paint a vivid picture. In a 12th century abbey record, Brother Alfred complains that the peasant's bread doth crack the jaw like a millstone. Yet even this harsh bread was a precious resource. Hoggets, young sheep, were only rarely sacrificed for mutton, and the barley and rye harvest was carefully measured out in family, pecks, and bushels, to ensure that there would be enough to last through the long winter. Peasants tried to eke out variety by adding legumes, peas, beans, lentils, into their pottage. In better years, the legume protein helped balance the grain-heavy diet. But legume crops were vulnerable to pests, and after a poor harvest, families might go months without a single helping of beans. In one documented famine year in 1316, peasants in what is now Belgium resorted to grinding leftover legume pods and tree bark into their porridge just to fill the pot. Cooking tools and techniques also played a role in the final taste. Most peasants had a single cooking pot, often made of coarse earthenware or iron, placed directly over hot coals. Stirring was done with a wooden stick or a simple paddle, tools that could be scorched or splintered, introducing charcoal or wood fragments into the food. It was common for a family to accidentally burn a batch of gruel to the pot's bottom, forcing them to scrape up charred bits that made the entire meal taste smoky and bitter. Nutritionally, this grain and legume routine provided the bulk of daily calories, enough energy to fuel back-breaking labor in the fields, but was severely deficient in essential vitamins and minerals. Modern analysis suggests that a medieval peasant's diet provided minimal vitamin C, unless they could afford fresh greens in spring, little to no vitamin A, and barely enough iron. The result was widespread malnutrition, stunted growth, and a susceptibility to infections. Skeletal remains from rural graveyards show signs of rickets, scurvy, and anemia in children and adults alike. Yet peasants weren't entirely passive victims of their circumstances. They learned small tricks to improve their meals. In spring, they foraged nettles, rich in iron, to stir into pottage. In summer, they plucked wild garlic mustard leaves for flavor and vitamin C. Women often ground small amounts of barley malt into the gruel to encourage fermentation, which not only added a faint sweetness but also made the porridge more digestible. A short but vital lesson emerges from these staples: what you choose to grow and how you prepare it can make or break a population's health. In medieval Europe, reliance on a limited set of hardy grains ensured survival through harsh winters, but it also created chronic nutrient gaps. Over time, agricultural innovations, like crop rotation that introduced legumes into the field cycle, or the later introduction of New World crops, corn, potatoes, would help close these gaps. But in the Middle Ages, every harvest's success or failure could mean the difference between a hearty family and one battling exhaustion and disease. The spice divide trade, wealth, and flavor. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the scent of warm cinnamon dusted atop a steaming bowl of porridge, or the bright bite of cracked pepper awakening a stew long left to simmer. For medieval peasants, those sensations were the stuff of daydreams. Spices, cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, cloves, pepper, were the true luxuries of the age, worth more by weight than gold, and their rarity created a world of sharp contrast between the richly seasoned feasts of the wealthy and the bland daily fare of the masses. Why spices were so expensive? The story begins thousands of miles to the east. Cinnamon bark was harvested in the mountain forests of Sri Lanka, peppercorns were gathered by hand along India's Malabar coast, nutmeg and cloves grew only on the tiny Banda Islands in the Spice Archipelago. Each pinch of spice you enjoy today represents an arduous journey by river, caravan, and sea. Transportation hazards, caravans crossing the Silk Road faced sandstorms in the Gobi Desert, bandit attacks near the Iranian plateau, and swollen rivers in the monsoon season. Middleman markups, every time spices changed hands, from the port of Calicut to Aden, then Alexandria, and finally Venice, each trader added a markup. By the time a single pound of nutmeg reached a Genoese ship bound for Europe, its price had ballooned to the value of 7 fattened oxen. Monopolistic guilds, Venetian and Genoese merchants formed tight-knit guilds that controlled shipping routes and port access, keeping supply intentionally limited to maintain astronomical prices. A real-life example, Marco Polo's pepper purchase. In 1275, the famous traveler Marco Polo recorded purchasing 20 pounds of black pepper in Hormuz, Persia, for 1,000 silver dirhams, enough to feed 200 families for a year. When he sold that same cargo in Venice, it fetched the equivalent of 50 oxen skins. That enormous profit margin fueled generations of expeditions, wars, and even inspired Columbus's westward voyage in search of a more direct route to the Spice Islands. Spices on medieval tables. Because of these barriers, only kings, nobles, and the very wealthy enjoyed food seasoned with exotic flavors. Cookbooks compiled around court kitchens, like La Viandia in 14th century France, reveal recipes calling for saffron-colored rice, pepper-spiced sauces, and sweet meat scented with cloves and ginger. At a single banquet hosted by England's Richard II in 1387, the royal kitchens prepared 2,000 chickens, 500 stags, 1,000 piglets, and platters dusted with costly cinnamon and sugar imported from Germany and Sicily. Meanwhile, just outside the castle walls, villagers made do with water-seasoned gruel and the occasional pinch of wild garlic or mustard seed for flavor. Local substitutes and folk flavors. Peasants found creative, if modest, ways to perk up their food. Wild mustard and garlic, foraged along woodland edges, these pungent greens added bite to pottage. Herb gardens, small kitchen plots grew parsley, thyme, and sage, plants easier to cultivate than imported spices. Vinegar and honey, a dash of sour vinegar or a dab of honey, if available, lent contrast to otherwise monotonous meals. Yet those substitutes couldn't replicate the warm, lingering aroma of true cinnamon or the tingle of freshly cracked peppercorns. Lesson learned, access shapes taste, and power. The medieval spice trade teaches us a timeless truth: who controls supply and distribution holds enormous cultural and economic power. Spices weren't merely condiments, they were status symbols, currency, and geopolitical leverage. European monarchs competed to secure pepper monopolies, whole wars erupted over access to spice ports. In our modern world, supermarket shelves burst with cumin, cardamom, and Szechuan pepper, all but erasing the stark spice divide of the past. But that convenience masks the complex supply chains and labor struggles that still underpin global flavor distribution today. Looking ahead, making the most of what you have. While medieval peasants couldn't sprinkle cinnamon on their bread, they mastered the art of seasonal foraging and home gardening, skills we can still apply in our own kitchens. Later in this series, we'll return to their clever techniques for preserving and enhancing whatever ingredients they could grow or gather. Seasonal survival, preservation techniques, and pitfalls. Imagine stepping into a cool, dimly lit root cellar in late autumn. Bundles of shredded cabbage hang from wooden beams, crocks of cucumbers bubble silently as lactic bacteria work their magic, and shelves hold rows of hand-picked apples, neatly arranged to keep winter's chill at bay. For medieval families, these below-ground pantries were nothing short of lifesavers, tools they used to stretch the summer's fleeting bounty through the long, lean months ahead. Why preservation was paramount. In a world without refrigeration or grocery stores, harvests defined survival. Once the last ears of corn were shelled and the pigs were slaughtered, there was no turning back. Preservation wasn't a culinary choice, it was a matter of life and death. Left to spoil, fruits and vegetables would grow moldy, meat and fish would rot or attract danger as pests. Learning to preserve food effectively and safely was the cornerstone of medieval self-reliance. Pickling and fermentation, turning sour into sustenance. Pickling and fermentation were among the most common methods for preserving perishables. Sauerkraut and cabbage, in monastery gardens across Germany and France, monks shredded cabbage, laid it with salt, and pressed it into stone crocks. Salt drew out water, creating an acidic environment where lactobacillus bacteria thrived, producing sauerkraut rich in vitamin C that could ward off scurvy. Pickled vegetables, cucumbers, onions, and even wild greens like nettles found their way into vinegary brines. Vinegar, an antimicrobial agent, killed off most spoilage bacteria, allowing these vegetables to keep for months in a cool cellar. Fermented fish sauces, inspired by Roman garum, some coastal communities in northern Europe made fish sauce by layering small fish, salt, and herbs in barrels. Over weeks, enzymes and bacteria broke down the fish into a pungent liquid seasoning that added umami to thin pottages. Real-world example, in 14th century Lübeck, Germany, the Hanseatic League port, records show that fishermen fermented herring in massive barrels destined not only for local consumption but also for export to inland towns. Archaeological digs outside Lübeck's medieval walls have unearthed broken barrel staves and salt-encrusted pottery sherds, confirming that this was an industry built on preservation. Salting and drying, concentrating flavor and keeping bugs at bay. Salting and drying were indispensable for meat and fish. Salted pork and beef, after autumn slaughter, families would rub salt deep into pork shoulders and beef flanks, then stack the cuts in wooden presses. The salt drew moisture from the flesh, creating an inhospitable environment for spoilage microbes. Over time, the meat could be stored in cellars or smokehouses. Fish drying, in coastal villages across England and Scandinavia, cod and herring were split open, heavily salted, and laid out on wooden flakes to dry in the wind and sun. The resulting stockfish could last an entire year, feeding inland communities far from the sea. Sausages and hams, crafters mixed ground pork with salt, pepper, and local herbs, then stuffed the mixture into cleaned animal intestines. Hung in smokehouses, these early sausages, ancestors of salami and prosciutto, dried slowly, concentrating flavor and nutrients. Real-world example, a 12th century Norse sagas reference the island of Lofoten, where drying racks, called gel, lined the shoreline. Dry cod, known as plipfist, was so prized that it became a backbone of medieval trade, shipped to markets as far away as Venice and Iberia. Smoking, flavor, color, and safety. Smoking added both preservation and flavor. Cold smoking, meat and fish were exposed to smoke from smoldering hardwoods, oak, beech, alder, at lower temperatures. The smoke deposited phenolic compounds that inhibited bacterial growth and imparted a smoky aroma. Hot smoking, at higher temperatures, smoking simultaneously cooked the meat and infused it with preservative smoke chemicals. This method produced more tender, edible products sooner than cold smoking, ideal for communities that needed quick turnaround. Many medieval households maintained small smokehouses or used smoke enclosures built into the kitchen hearth. The lingering smoke also acted as an insect repellent, keeping flies and moths away from hanging foods. Pitfalls and dangers. While preservation was essential, the techniques carried risks. Botulism and toxin growth, inadequate salting or poor fermentation could allow Clostridium botulinum or other pathogens to thrive, leading to potentially fatal food poisoning. Off flavors and molds, over-drying meat made it rock hard, and under-drying allowed mold growth. Some molds produced mycotoxins that caused illness. Nutritional loss, repeated drying, salting, and fermenting could leach out water-soluble vitamins, making preserved foods less nutritious than their fresh counterparts. Salt shortages. Salt itself was a valuable commodity, often taxed heavily by monarchs. In years when salt shipments failed, entire communities struggled to preserve enough food for winter. A chilling account comes from 15th century England, where villages near the salt-poor marshes of Norfolk recorded outbreaks of sudden sickness traced to a poorly fermented fish source. Contemporary chronicles attribute dozens of deaths to spoiled garum barrels, serving as a grim reminder that preservation was both art and science, and errors could be deadly. Lesson learned: preservation is a balancing act. Medieval preservation teaches us that extending shelf life invariably alters flavor, texture, and nutrition, and carries its own hazards. Mastering the right balance of salt, smoke, or acidity was crucial. A dash too little salt or a fermentation crock left uncovered could mean wasted harvests and hungry families. Today, we benefit from scientific food safety standards and controlled processes. But even so, home canners must heed guidelines to avoid botulism, and chefs still calibrate smoking times and temperatures to achieve perfect flavor without dryness. Meat on the margins: rarity, regulation, and resourcefulness. Close your eyes and picture the cool dawn mist curling over a village green in late autumn. Somewhere, a pig squeals as it's guided to the slaughterhouse behind a thatched barn. Beyond the hedgerows, you hear the crack of a poacher's net or the honk of a tracked goose. For medieval peasants, meat was never simply a dinner choice. It was a precious, tightly controlled resource, bound up in feudal law, seasonal rhythms, and the ingenuity of those who lived on the margins of a meat-rich world. Why meat was rare and regulated. In medieval Europe, livestock served multiple roles. A cow gave milk and labor, a pig supplied lard for cooking and lighting, chickens laid eggs and ate pests. Slaughtering an animal meant forfeiting those benefits, an economic sacrifice a peasant family could only make sparingly. Worse yet, royal and noble forest laws put entire swaths of wooded land off limits to commoners. The Forest of Sherwood, or New Forest in England, declared royal hunting preserves by William I and William I punished poaching deer and boar with fines, whipping, or worse. A 13th century statute fined villagers up to 100 shillings, a fortune, for killing venison. Chronicler Matthew Paris even recounts how a man caught snaring a stag near Westminster had his hand cut off. It was that serious. The seasonal slaughter, Michaelmas and beyond. Most peasant families planned their annual pig slaughter around Michaelmas, September 29th, when cooler weather helped preserve meat. After the work of autumn harvests, neighbors gathered to share labor and tools in a communal feast. Slaughter day, the pig was quickly dispatched and scalded so its bristles could be scraped off. Butchering and salting, cuts of pork, shoulder, belly, hams, were rubbed with salt and packed in barrels. Head and feet went into boiling pots to make brawn, head cheese, a gelatinous terrine that used every scrap. Sausage making, intestines became casings for black pudding, blood sausage, mixed with barley, onions, and spices. No part went to waste. These communal slaughters not only maximized efficiency but also spread the preserved meat among many families, ensuring a supply of salted pork through winter. Resourcefulness on a shoestring. When fresh meat was scarce, peasants turned to offal and small game. Offal feasts, kidneys, liver, heart, and tongue made their way into stews or were stuffed into pastries called pies of entrails, flavored with onions and herbs. Even the snout and stomach, haggis-like dishes, found fans among resourceful cooks. Birds and rabbits, chickens and rabbits were kept in hutches. Their meat was rationed for weddings or saints' days. Pigeons were trapped in dovecots. A 14th century parish register from Norfolk records the chicken tithe paid by villagers to their lord each spring, proof just how strictly these proteins were monitored. Fish and frogs. In swampy regions of Flanders, peasants harvested eels and frogs' legs from canals. While not meat in the strictest sense, these proteins filled the gap on meatless days and when poaching a deer was unthinkable. Real-life example, medieval court rolls from Yorkshire record a case in 1324 where a widow named Isabel was fined sixpence, about a day's wage, for killing her neighbor's ram to feed her starving children. Local officials, moved by her plea, reduced the fine, but only after the ram's owners petitioned for compensation. The incident highlights both the desperation and the thin line peasants walked. Nose-to-tail cooking, an early sustainability model. You might think nose-to-tail is a modern trend, but medieval cooks practiced it out of necessity. Blood sausages used pig's blood mixed with grains and fat. Tripe, stomach lining, stewed with vinegar, onions, and carrots. Brawn head cheese used jowls and cheeks, set in a jelly from boiling carcass bones. Bone broth simmered bones and connective tissue to create a nutrient-rich consommé. This approach maximized calories and nutrients from each animal and minimized waste, an early lesson in sustainable cooking. Lesson learned: scarcity sparks ingenuity. When meat was strictly rationed by law, economy, and custom, peasant ingenuity turned necessity into creativity. Every organ, feather, and fin had value. What might seem unappetizing today, blood pudding or tripe, was a cherished delicacy then. In our own kitchens, remembering this resourcefulness can transform how we cook, using vegetable stems for stock, repurposing meat bones into broths, and exploring cuts we'd normally discard. Scarcity need not be a barrier to flavor or nutrition, it can be the spark for innovation. Fish and fasting, navigating meatless days. Close your eyes and imagine a medieval calendar, not filled with birthdays and market days, but marked instead by countless fast days, meatless Wednesdays, Fridays, Ember days, and the 40 days of Lent. For devout Christians, abstaining from meat was a sacred obligation. But for peasants already scraping by, those dietary mandates required both adaptation and creativity. Enter the humble fish, a versatile protein that became the backbone of medieval meatless meals. Fasting roles and the rise of fish days. The Catholic Church wielded immense influence over what, and when, people ate. Beyond Lent, worship is observed. Weekly abstinence, no meat on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. Ember days, seasonal fasts tied to agricultural cycles. Vigils and vigiliae, eves of major feast days required low-protein meals. Disobedience risked both spiritual guilt and secular punishment. But fish, exempt from meat roles, offered salvation for hungry stomachs. Inland versus coastal diets. Coastal communities. Villages on the North Sea or Atlantic shoreline thrived on fresh catch. Herring runs, annual migrations of herring allowed villages to haul in thousands of fish in nets. Monastic fish ponds, monasteries like Fountains Abbey, Yorkshire, built carp and pike ponds to guarantee a year-round fresh supply. Real example, in 12th century Chester, records note that monks released excess carp into village canals each Friday, encouraging locals to fish freely in return for tithes and prayers. Inland towns. With rivers and lakes as their nearest water sources, inland peasants relied on preserved fish. Salted and dried cod, or stockfish arrived via the Hanseatic trade from Baltic ports. Its durability made it a pantry staple from Leipzig to London. Smoked eel and pike, rivers teemed with eels, smokehouses along the Thames turned them into rich, oily delicacies. Preservation techniques for fish. Barrel salting, freshly gutted fish layered with coarse salt in wooden barrels. Over weeks, salt drew out moisture, inhibiting spoilage. Drying on flakes, split fish laid on wooden racks, flakes, above sea spray. Sun and wind dried them in days. Smoking, cold smoking fish in smokehouses added preservative phenols and deep flavor. These methods created a pantry stock that would keep through Lent and beyond, vital when fresh markets closed in winter. Church and commerce, the symbiotic relationship. Oddly, the church's fasting roles boosted fish trade. Market days, every Friday and Lent Sunday saw booming fish markets. Coastal merchants timed shipments to arrive just before ember fasts. Guild support, in places like Seville and Antwerp, fishermen's guilds lobbied for lower tithes on fish, acknowledging both the spiritual and economic value of a steady fish supply. Real example, in 14th century Bruges, city ordinances mandated that fishmongers pay half the usual grain tax if they sold only fish on designated fast days, an incentive that made fish more affordable for the poor. Creative fish dishes. Peasants didn't simply boil salted herring in water. They learned to enhance flavor. Pottage with anchovy paste, small smelts mashed into pottage gave an umami kick. Pickled eel stew, eel, onions, and vinegar simmered with barley made a hearty meatless Monday meal. Fish sausages, ground fish mixed with herbs, bound in netting, then boiled, and early fishbowl improved. These simple innovations turned repetitive fish dinners into moments of culinary delight. Lesson learned: rules drive innovation. When restrictions barred one food group, people innovate with what's allowed. Medieval fasting rules might seem harsh today, but they sparked a vibrant fish economy and led to preservation techniques still used in cuisines worldwide. In modern kitchens, we can apply the same spirit. When certain ingredients are unavailable or off-limits, experimenting with alternatives, lentil, meatloaf, zucchini, noodles, or mushroom broths, can yield surprising flavor and nutrition. Number 6. Fraud on the loaf and in the cup, adulteration exposed. Imagine trudging home after a long day in the fields, your stomach rumbling, and looking forward to a crusty loaf of bread and a mug of ale. Now imagine biting into that loaf only to crunch on gritty sawdust, and sipping ale so weak it barely warms your throat. In medieval Europe, food fraud wasn't just a metaphor, it was an unwelcome daily reality. Bakers and brewers, squeezed by crushing taxes and unpredictable harvests, often stretched their ingredients by adding fillers or water, offering more volume at the expense of quality and safety. Why adulteration happened? High cost of grain and malt. When harvests failed or taxes rose, bakers paid top coin for flour. Stretching dough with cheaper fillers like ground acorns or bran preserved their profits, and sometimes their livelihoods. Expensive brewing ingredients, hops and malted barley could be costly, especially in lean years. Diluting ale with extra water, or even small amounts of stale sour beer, kept the taps flowing. Weak enforcement. Though laws existed, local authorities often lacked the manpower or will to inspect every bakery and tavern. A small fine was sometimes seen as a cost of doing business. A size of bread and ale, medieval quality control. By the late 13th century, English Parliament recognized the problem and enacted the Assize of Bread and Ale, circa 1266. This statute set strict standards for bread weight and price. A loaf's weight had to match its price, calibrated to the daily cost of wheat. Ale strength and volume. Brewers were required to sell a fixed volume of ale for a set price, ensuring it wasn't dangerously watered down. Regular inspections, local ale tasters, and bread weighers patrolled markets, sampling products and weighing loaves. Real-life example: in York, a 1384 court record names baker Robert Huggett, convicted of mixing chalk into his bread. He was fined 5 shillings, about 2 days' wages, and publicly paraded on a cart with his offending loaves tied to his neck, an ignominious punishment meant to deter others. Common adulterants and their dangers. Ground acorns and chestnuts, added tannins made bread bitter and could cause stomach upset in large amounts. Chalk and whiting. White chalk disguised inferior flour but offered no nutrition and risked dental damage. Sawdust and bran. Gritty residues wore down teeth and contributed to gastrointestinal irritation. Stale ale or sour beer. Brewers sometimes added leftover swill or leavings to fresh batches, leading to unpredictable fermentation, and occasionally, toxic bacterial growth. While these practices preserved profits, they endangered health. Chronic malnutrition became more severe when staples provided little nourishment, gastrointestinal ailments and tooth decay were rampant. Alewives and taverns, a fraught relationship. In every village, the alewife was both a local institution and a target for suspicion. These women brewed in small batches and sold from their homes or village inns. Their reputations hinged on consistency and quality, but when barley prices spiked, even the most honest alewives faced temptation. Short measure, pouring a smaller mug than promised, pocketing the excess ale. Watering down, diluting with well water, especially when barley was scarce. Recycling lees, straining dregs from one batch into the next, risking off flavors and spoilage. Real-life example: in 1423 Lancashire, widow Agnes Holloway stood trial for falsifying her ale by selling a drink so thin that customers complained of drinking little more than mist. Although the magistrate dismissed her, citing her loyal customer support, records show she later moved her operation to escape the persistent rumors. Lesson learned: integrity matters, even in tough times. The medieval quest to stretch scarce resources teaches a crucial lesson: short-term gains from cutting corners often carry long-term costs. In food production, honesty and transparency build trust, while fraud breeds health risks and reputational damage. Today's food safety regulations and labeling laws exist because countless communities learned, sometimes painfully, the dangers of unregulated adulteration. In your own kitchen, remember that a handful of quality ingredients can outshine a glut of fillers. Whether you're baking bread or brewing kombucha, investing in genuine components is both safer and more satisfying. Filth and flames, hygiene, disease, and food safety. Picture a small thatched cottage on a brisk autumn evening. Smoke curls through an open door, where a family gathers around a single pot of potted bubbling on the hearth. In the corner, a pig huddles for warmth. Outside, the lane is muddy, with refuse and animal droppings lining the gutter. Welcome to a time when hygiene was a luxury few could afford, and disease lurked behind every meal. Why hygiene mattered, but was often ignored. In the Middle Ages, understanding of germs didn't exist. People believed illness came from miasma, bad air, or divine punishment. Yet even without modern science, they recognized that filthy conditions bred sickness. Still, cramped living quarters forced humans and livestock under the same roof, while waste disposal was rudimentary. Indoor livestock, farmers kept pigs, chickens, and even cows inside for warmth and protection. Their waste mingled with straw bedding, spreading fleas and lice. Open drains and dumping, human excrement and household refuse were often thrown into street ditches or nearby rivers, polluting water sources. A 13th century London ordinance finally forbade dumping near the Thames banks, but enforcement was spotty. Crowded markets, meat and fish stalls lying narrow lanes, flies buzzing over exposed carcasses and salted barrels. Vendors seldom washed hands or utensils between customers. Real-life example, King John's fatal feast. In 1216, King John of England, yes, the Robin Hood-era monarch, indulged at Lynn with peaches and newly pressed cider, luxuries that carried hidden dangers. Chroniclers report he fell violently ill with dysentery soon after. Modern historians suspect foodborne pathogens, bacteria in spoiled fruit or unclean cider, led to his downfall. Even royalty couldn't escape the perils of medieval food safety. The Black Death and Plague Pits. By the mid-14th century, the Black Death swept through Europe, killing an estimated 30 to 50% of the population. While rats and fleas carried Yersinia pestis, the underlying cause was the filthy urban environment. Rat-infested homes, grain stores attracted rodents, rats nested in thatch, then migrated into human dwellings. Open sores, narrow city streets doubled as latrines. Contaminated water splashed onto doorsteps and into wells, spreading dysentery and typhoid alongside plague. Mass graves, archaeologists in London and Marseille have uncovered plague pits where thousands were buried in unmarked communal graves, testimony to the city's overwhelmed sanitation. Cooking over open flames, a double-edged sword. Hearth cooking killed some pathogens, boiling pottage or roasting meat over coals, but it also introduced hazards. Smoke-bathed kitchens, smoke stung eyes and sooted surfaces. Over time, inhaled particulates contributed to respiratory ailments. Blackened pots and burnt bits, caked on soot and scorched food fragments housed bacteria that resurfaced in fresh meals. Cleaning heavy iron cauldrons was arduous and often neglected. Cross-contamination, the same dagger that carved roast boar might split a loaf of bread, a single ragged cloth wiped sweat and then stirred stew, introducing microbes between tasks. Real-life example, an account from 15th century Tuscany describes a castle cook so overwhelmed by feast preparations that he reused cauldrons all week, leading to an outbreak of food poisoning that sickened dozens of guests. The noble host quietly paid compensations, but the cook's reputation never recovered. Everyday illness and infant mortality. Chronic gastrointestinal infections kept mortality rates high. Children under fire. Without safe milk or clean water, infants frequently died of diarrhea. Some paleobotanical studies suggest families boiled water only when visibly soiled, too late to remove microscopic threats. Adult vulnerability, ailing peasants, already malnourished by grain-based diets, lacked reserves to fight off infections. Simple wounds from farm chores often turned septic in unsterile conditions. Attempts at improvement. Even in ignorance, some measures helped. Washing hands, monastic hospitals in Paris, Hôtel Dieu, instituted hand-washing rituals for caregivers in the early 1300s, though soap was rare and primitive. Street cleaning efforts. In 1349, Florence passed ordinances requiring families to sweep waste into central carts, then burn it, an early public health measure during plague outbreaks. Separation of functions. Noble households sometimes designated separate kitchens for meats, breads, and vegetables, reducing cross-contamination. Lesson learned: sanitation is non-negotiable. Medieval struggles show us that no amount of spices or smoke can replace basic cleanliness. Safe food relies on clean hands, utensils, and living spaces. Modern practices, refrigeration, sterilization, sewage systems, evolved precisely to combat the invisible threats our ancestors faced. In your own life, simple habits, washing produce, sanitizing cutting boards, cleaning sponges, honor a hard-won legacy of food safety. Fasting and feasting, religious calendars and culinary extremes. Close your eyes and picture a medieval calendar hung in stone churches and humble cottages alike, its squares not filled with birthdays, but with fast days and feast days, Ash Wednesday, Ember Days, Pentecost, Michaelmas, Christmas, Saints' Days, and more. In medieval Europe, the rhythm of everyday life was governed by this sacred schedule, swinging daily diets from austere abstinence to exuberant indulgence. Let's explore how the Church's calendar created extremes of fasting and feasting that shaped both stomachs and souls. The fast days, a diet of restraint. The Catholic Church mandated numerous days of purification. Weekly abstinence, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays called for seafood or plant-based meals only. Ember days, quarterly fasts tied to the seasons, 3 days in spring, summer, autumn, and winter, reminded believers to give thanks for and pray over the new harvest. Lent, the 40-day period before Easter, a season of severe penance, no meat, dairy, eggs, and sometimes even oil, on weekdays. Vigils and vigiliae, eves of major feasts, like the Vigil of All Saints, required partial abstinence. For the average peasant, already subsisting on porridge, bread, and occasional fish, these restrictions demanded creativity. A typical Lenten weekday might feature pottage of barley and peas, with wild nettles or leeks. Salted fish in broth, if near rivers or trade routes. Herb-infused vinegar, drizzled on coarse bread to add sweetness. Real-life example, in 15th century Burgundy, parish records note that villagers took communion in boiled turnips when fish deliveries failed during a harsh winter, highlighting how scarcity and fasting rules compounded hardships. Midwinter feasts, Carnival and the Great Indulgence. Every fast had its counterpoint in feast days, where abstinence gave way to abundance. Carnival, Mardi Gras literally, farewell to meat, the days before Ash Wednesday erupted in sausage making, butter and egg omelets, and wine-soaked pastries. Town squares filled with markets hawking salted pork and fresh butter, supplies stashed away for Lent. Michaelmas, September 29th, marked the end of harvest. Families slaughtered geese and made pies, celebrating the grain and game that would sustain them through winter. Christmas and Easter, grand events in church and manor alike. Planners stockpile salt pork, cheese, ale, spiced wines, and pastries months in advance. Real-life example, in 1327 Florence, the Scoppio del Caro festivities included a Feast of the Skin, Festa della Pelle, where citizens were served roasted pork skins flavored with saffron and honey, smashing fast-day austerity with a wallop of festive flavor. Monastic moderation versus courtly excess. Even within the church, attitudes varied. Monastic fasting, many orders, Benedictines, Cistercians, embraced stricter observances, simple fare of bread, water, and vegetables. A 12th century roll from the Abbey of Cluny limited fish to 2 meals a week, reserving it as a penitential luxury. Episcopal banquets, bishops and abbots, however, often indulged. Surviving inventories from Canterbury Cathedral list vaults stocked with barreled herring, barrels of spiced wine, and gilded sugar subtleties served at ecclesiastical councils. Meanwhile, nobles reveled in the gap between Lenten Ash and Easter's first joys, sugar-coated dates, roast swans, and tower-high loaves sculpted into elaborately painted subtleties. Feasts were stagecraft, displays of wealth, power, and divine favor. Feast preparations and logistics. The logistics behind grand feasts were staggering. Advanced planning, noble households mapped out menus months ahead, ordering spices from Venice and sugar from Mallorca. Butcher and baker coordination, slaughterhouses buzzed with activity before Michaelmas, specialist bakers crafted sugar paste centerpieces. Servant training, brooms, scullions, and carvers practiced table service rituals, who served the first course, when to refill goblets, and how to clear plates smoothly. A single banquet might require hundreds of staff and days of prep. Yet, for the common folk, feast day tables groaned under the weight of communal dishes, hogs boiled whole, trencher breads hollowed into bowls, pottage of sins, enriched with every festival allowable. Lesson learned: balance is key. Medieval calendars teach us that ritualized restraint and celebration balanced each other. While modern diets rarely track fasts so rigorously, the idea of seasonal or occasional fasting, whether for health, intermittent fasting, or spiritual reflection, can renew appreciation for food's value. Conversely, planned indulgences remind us that celebration and community matter, too. Noble banquets, spectacle, excess, and hidden hazards. Imagine entering a great hall bathed in hundreds of candle flames, long oak tables groaning under platters of gilded peacocks, sugar-spun subtleties, and pours of ruby wine. This was the world of the medieval noble banquet, a place where every dish proclaimed wealth, where every spice spoke of far-flung trade, and where the excesses of privilege often hid dangerous pitfalls. Feast as spectacle. In noble courts, a feast was more than a meal, it was political theater. Elaborate centerpieces, subtleties, artistic sugar sculptures, castles, unicorns, even entire battle scenes, graced the tables. Sugar, imported from Mediterranean plantations, cost more than gold by weight, so these subtleties were both art and statement. Live presentations, whole swans or peacocks, their plumage reattached after roasting, were sometimes served alive on silver skewers for shock value. Guests gasped at the surreal sight, reinforcing the host's ability to command both nature and craftsmanship. Procession of courses, a typical banquet unspooled in 3 or more courses. Socks and broths, thin soups and bread socks lightly whetted the appetite. Meats and roasts, boar, venison, swan, capon, each lavishly spiced. Sweetmeats and desserts, marzipan fruits, honeyed pastries, and the pièce de résistance, sugar subtleties. Real-life example, at King Richard II's 1387 Coventry feast, chroniclers record over 2,000 chickens, 400 sheep, and 500 stags served to roughly 1,600 guests, along with enough pepper, cinnamon, and sugar to spice every dish. An event like this cost the crown thousands of pounds, equivalent to millions today, and underscored royal magnificence. Hidden hazards of excess. Despite the pageantry, such banquets carried risks. Spoilage and food poisoning. Without refrigeration, large quantities of meat and dairy could easily spoil. Even skilled cooks sometimes misjudge freshness, leading to deadly outbreaks of dysentery or botulism. Overindulgence and health crises, nobles often ate and drank beyond their limits. The chronicler Jean Froissart notes one courtier, fallen into a drunken stupor, so deep he awoke 2 days later with severe gout, an ailment so common it earned the nickname, rich man's disease. Fire and smoke hazards, great halls filled with open flame torches and cooking fires posed fire risks. In 15th century Ferrara, Duke Borso Diaz nearly lost his entire kitchen when a rich dessert caught fire, setting tapestries ablaze and prompting an urgent reconstruction. Real-life example, the 1465 banquet hosted by Margaret of York featured extravagant quantities of spiced wine. One guest, the French ambassador, reputedly fell ill after too many cups of mulled hippocras, wine steeped with honey and spices, leading to rumors he'd been poisoned, though in reality it was likely sheer overindulgence. Economics and ecology of banquets. Large-scale feasting required logistical marvels. Procurement, royal provisioning officers scoured the realm for game, fish, grains, and exotic imports. Spices arrived by Venetian galleys, sugar came from Sicilian plantations. Servant armies, hundreds of cooks, scullions, carvers, and footmen moved in choreographed teams to assemble, serve, and clear courses. Waste and sustainability, leftovers, bones, trimmings, stale bread, often fed castle dogs or were repurposed into broths. Yet the scale of waste was enormous, devouring entire animal herds to feed a single night revelry. Cultural significance. These feasts were social glue. Alliance building, marriages and treaties were sealed over shared platters. Status display, The wealthiest hosts outdid rivals in course number, ingredient rarity, and table pageantry. Culinary innovation. Court kitchens experimented with new recipes, like almond milk blancmange, to wow guests and set gastronomic trends. Yet the contrast with peasant life couldn't have been starker. For every pageant of roast swan, thousands of rural families struggled with pottage and salted fish. Lesson learned: moderation and mindfulness. Noble banquets reveal that abundance without restraint can breed danger, from foodborne illness to personal health crises. Today, we celebrate culinary creativity, but we also understand the value of food safety, balanced nutrition, and mindful consumption. Splurging on special occasions is part of life, yet even in celebration, respect for ingredients and awareness of limits keep both stomach and society healthy. Legacy on the plate: medieval lessons for modern America. We've journeyed from the humble hearths of medieval peasants through spice-laden courts and opulent banquets. Along the way, we've uncovered how scarcity bred creativity, how ritual shaped diets, and how resourcefulness turned necessity into culinary art. Now, let's bring those lessons into our kitchens today, because even in our age of supermarkets and global shipping, medieval wisdom still holds surprising relevance. 1. Seasonal eating and local sourcing. Medieval context: peasants ate what grew nearby and only when it was in season: spring nettles, summer fruits, autumn root crops, winter salted meats. Monasteries maintained kitchen gardens, estates relied on local harvests. Modern application: seek out farmers markets and community-supported agriculture, CSA. Local berries in June, apples in September, winter squash in November. Embrace the natural calendar. Real-life example: in Portland, Oregon, Chef Naomi Pomeroy built her menu around Oregon's seasonal bounty: spring ranks, summer peaches, fall hazelnuts, winning acclaim for flavorful dishes that celebrated local terroir. Lesson: eating seasonally maximizes flavor, nutrition, and sustainability by reducing transport emissions and supporting local farmers. 2. Preservation techniques for sustainability. Medieval context: pickling, fermenting, smoking, and salting extended the life of food through lean months: sauerkraut to prevent scurvy, smoked herring for winter protein. Modern application: bring back home preservation, ferment a small batch of kimchi, jar summer's pickles, or cold smoke salmon in your backyard smoker. Real-life example: the Maine Saltwater Farm Co-op teaches coastal communities to cure and smoke local fish, creating a year-round product and reviving a centuries-old tradition. Lesson: preserving surplus reduces food waste, enhances flavor complexity, and connects us with our culinary heritage. 3. Nose-to-tail cooking and zero waste. Medieval context: every part of the animal was used: blood pudding, tripe stews, bone broths. Waste was unthinkable when meat was precious. Modern application: support restaurants and butchers practicing nose-to-tail principles, or try it at home: roast marrow bones, slow-cook oxtails, make pâté from chicken livers. Real-life example: Chicago's acclaimed restaurant Blackbird features whole animal menus, transforming offal into elevated dishes like beef tongue tacos and crispy chicken skin chicharrones. Lesson: valuing the whole animal honors the farmer's work, diversifies our diets, and minimizes environmental impact. 4. Mindful moderation and celebration. Medieval context: the church's cycles of fasting and feasting created balance, seasons of restraint followed by seasons of abundance. Noble banquets dazzle but carried hidden health risks. Modern application: adopt mindful eating habits, balance indulgent meals with lighter fare, perhaps inspired by intermittent fasting or meatless Mondays. Plan occasional celebrations without guilt, but stay attuned to portion size and nutritional balance. Real-life example: writer and chef Michael Pollan advocates mostly plants, not too much, and tasty treats, mantra echoing medieval moderation and festal joy. Lesson: rhythm in diet, alternating simplicity with celebration, supports both physical health and mental well-being. 5. Community and sharing. Medieval context: communal slaughter, village ovens, and monastic almsgiving tied people together. Shared resources, village mills, public smokehouses fostered resilience. Modern application: cook and eat with your community, host potlucks, join community gardens, participate in cooperative buying clubs. Real-life example: Detroit's Joy Urban Farm brings neighbors together to grow, harvest, and share produce, building social bonds and food security. Lesson: food connects us, sharing meals strengthens community resilience and combats isolation. 6. Food safety and hygiene. Medieval context: lack of sanitation led to poisoning and plague. Over time, hand washing, separate cook spaces, and waste ordinances emerged. Modern application: uphold rigorous hygiene, wash hands, sanitize cutting boards, store perishables properly, and follow safe canning guidelines. Real-life example: during the COVID-19 pandemic, home cooks learned the importance of disinfecting surfaces and preserving food safely, echoing medieval efforts to curb disease through cleanliness. Lesson: basic food safety prevents illness, an unbroken chain from medieval orders to modern public health codes. 7. Respect for ingredients. Medieval context: spices were treasured, salt was precious, every grain counted. Ingredients told stories of far-off lands or local labor. Modern application: choose quality over quantity. Invest in good olive oil, freshly milled flours, fair trade spices. Learn about your food's origin, its farmers, producers, and journey. Real-life example: the slow food movement champions good, clean, and fair ingredients, preserving biodiversity and culinary traditions. Lesson: knowing and valuing where food comes from nourishes gratitude and encourages ethical consumption. 8. Knife skills and kitchen organization. Medieval context: one pot, one knife, many meals. Cooks learned to butcher whole animals, fillet fish, and maintain tools by hand. Modern application: sharpen basic knife and butchery skills. Keep your workspace organized. A sharp knife and a clean station speed prep and reduce accidents. Real-life example: culinary schools like America's Culinary Institute stress foundational knife skills, proving their timeless utility. Lesson: mastery of simple tools elevates home cooking, just as a medieval cook's trusted blades shaped every meal. Bridging past and present. Medieval cooks lived at the mercy of seasons, rulers, and religion, but their ingenuity left us a toolkit of techniques and traditions. By embracing seasonality, preservation, whole animal cooking, mindful feasting, community sharing, food safety, ingredient respect, and kitchen craft, we honor that legacy while forging healthier, more sustainable lives. Final thoughts and call to action. Whether you're pickling your first jar of carrots, trying a beef bone broth, or simply savoring that seasonal tomato, you join a lineage stretching back centuries. So next time you cook, ask yourself, what's in season? How might I preserve this bounty? Can I use every part of what I buy? How can I share today's meal with my community? These questions, rooted in medieval wisdom, guide us toward a more thoughtful, flavorful, and connected way of eating. Thank you for joining this journey through medieval food culture. May your modern table be as rich in story and substance as those long-ago hearths, and may you find joy, resilience, and creativity in every bite.